On November 22, 1963, the world was rocked by terrible news. In Dallas, Texas, John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States of the superpower of the bipolar world, was shot dead. His death is one of the biggest mysteries of the 20th century. Despite the killer's identity being revealed the same day, millions still doubt the investigation's conclusions. In 2023, for example, 65% of Americans were convinced of a conspiracy. Kennedy still remains in the top 10 favorite presidents of America. He began his term in 1961 with the famous phrase, "Don't ask what the country can do for you, ask yourself what you can do for it." The main thing Kennedy did was to give people hope for peace. He led the country through two crises, the Caribbean and Berlin, refused to bomb Cuba, and not only planned to be friends with the Soviet Union, but secretly corresponded with Khrushchev. Without CIA and State Department knowledge, he communicated with the enemy, not at all American. He spoke of equality for all US citizens, male, female, and black. He intensified the fight against the mafia and criminals. John brought in professional bureaucrats and scholars, not businessmen, to his administration. And most importantly, Kennedy went against the most powerful bankers, issuing the treasury dollar. But about everything in order. If ordinary Americans adored him, then among the top, Kennedy's policy did not suit many. Experts emphasize that he has made enemies among the ultra-right, mafiosi, multinational companies, the military, and even the masters of money. In short, he crossed everyone's path. Today, I propose to understand who really benefited from Kennedy's death and who could have done it. In the fall of 1963, Kennedy made a tour of the American states, meeting with the people and governors. So on November 22, 1963, John F. Kennedy and his wife Jacqueline flew to Dallas. A little earlier, Vice President Lyndon Jones arrived. The US President and Vice President fly on separate planes to ensure the country doesn't lose both leaders in the event of a catastrophe. The presidential motorcade left the airport at 11:50. In the open-top car with Kennedy couple were Governor John Connally, his wife, and two security guards. An estimated 200,000 people lined the president's 16-kilometer route. The route was designed by agents of the Secret Intelligence Service, but the day before it was published in the newspapers for some reason. After the limousine passed the book depository on Elm Street, shots rang out. At exactly 12:30, the first bullet struck the president in the neck, traveled out and wounded Connally, who was sitting in the front. The second bullet shattered Kennedy's skull. 5 minutes later, the motorcade rushed to the hospital, but the president could not be saved. Kennedy was pronounced dead at 1 o'clock. Shortly after, witnesses were found who saw a rifle barrel in the 6th-floor window of the book depository. They also found bullet casings and hidden weapons. A survey of employees revealed that one worker, Lee Harvey Oswald, left the building immediately after the shots. That's how police learned the suspect's distinct features just minutes later. A police officer spotted Oswald on a street and called out to him. In response, he shot him with a revolver and fled into a movie theater. Oswald was apprehended just 1 hour and 20 minutes after Kennedy's assassination, and that evening was charged with double murder. Oswald's wife, Marina, later confirmed that the rifle found in the book depository belonged to her husband. After Kennedy's death, his deputy, Lyndon Jones, automatically became president, and as early as 2:38 p.m., he took the oath aboard an airliner at Dallas Airport. Who is Lee Harvey Oswald anyway? Experts consider him a classic nutcase. But there's a lot more to his story. As a teenager, he called himself a Marxist. At 17, he enlisted in the US Marine Corps and was a mediocre rifleman. He was court-martialed 3 times. He'll either shoot his own elbow, fight with a sergeant, or fire his gun while on jungle patrol. During the service, he learned Russian and then took exams. But the results turned out to be weak. In 1959, he was transferred to the reserve and suddenly found himself in the USSR, where he expressed his desire to become a Soviet citizen. He expressed disillusionment with capitalism and the US, wanting to renounce his native citizenship. But his request was denied. The rejection so upset Oswald that he slit his veins in his hotel room. The Soviet services did not know what to do with him. Oswald himself wanted to study at Moscow State University, but they sent him far away to Minsk to work as a turner in a factory. Of course, the KGB followed him to see who he was, a spy for the States or just a kid with weirdness. Oswald had a great life there. A refugee allowance was added to his salary. It was about 700 rubles a month. According to other sources, it was twice as much.
The total income was like that of a factory director.
But there was only one problem. There was nowhere to spend the money. As he himself wrote in his diary, "Work is boring, no nightclubs or bowling, just union dances. I've had enough." So Oswald became disillusioned with the Soviet Union. And in 1961, he returned back to the United States. But not alone. With him arrived Russian wife Marina Prusakova and a young daughter. In the United States, American intelligence agencies immediately started to keep a watch on Oswald. Nervously interested agents much less than his Russian wife.
In her, they saw a Soviet spy.
That pissed Lee off. A week before Kennedy's assassination, he promised agents to blow up the FBI building if Marina was not left alone. In New Orleans, Oswald found a new hobby. He began organizing rallies in support of Fidel Castro's communist regime and handed out leaflets, "Hands off Cuba." 2 months before Kennedy's assassination, Oswald suddenly found himself in Mexico, where he first requested a visa to Cuba and then asylum in the Soviet Union. According to KGB officers, the American looked like a man on the verge of a nervous breakdown. His hands were shaking and he was convinced that his life was in danger in the United States. But Oswald was never granted a visa, deciding that he would bring only trouble. One other point. In the spring of 1963, Oswald bought a rifle and a revolver. He used the guns right away. He tried to kill retired Major General Edwin Ocker, an ardent anti-communist. His involvement in this story came to light during the JFK assassination investigation. Again, his wife Marina confessed to it. Further, in October 1963, a month before the assassination, Oswald got a job in the same book depository, from where, according to the official version, he shot at President Kennedy. Now, if Oswald was a lone nutcase, what motives drove him? First, in his eyes, Kennedy was an enemy of Cuban revolutionary Fidel Castro, and he was the head of the American system, which Lee had hated since childhood. Second, FBI agents were haunting his wife. And third, this was Oswald's chance to draw attention to himself. But under interrogation, Oswald screamed that he was innocent and had been detained because he lived in the Soviet Union, that he was just a scapegoat. 2 days later, Oswald was to be transported to the county jail. But as he was being led through the basement, a man, Jack Ruby, came out of the crowd and shot Oswald. Surrounded by police and reporters, the shooter turned out to be the owner of a local bar and had ties to the mafia. He later confessed that he killed Oswald to spare Jacqueline Kennedy the pain of a trial. And to justify Dallas say, "Not all here are monsters like Oswald, who kill presidents." Ruby was sentenced to death, but the sentence was later overturned. But he died 4 years later of cancer, in the same hospital where Oswald died, and where President Kennedy was pronounced dead. Thus, from the pages of history went the president, his assassin, and his assassin's assassin. A week after the tragedy, President Lyndon Jones created a 7-member commission to investigate. It was headed by Supreme Court Chief Justice Earl Warren. The assistants included John McCloy, former president of the World Bank, and Alan Dulles, the former CIA chief whom Kennedy fired after the failed invasion of Cuba. The FBI conducted more than 25,000 interviews, and after 10 months of work, the commission delivered a report. It revealed that Lee Harvey Oswald was the sole shooter. His killer, Jack Ruby, also acted alone. But as we know, the commission is not trusted by many, and there are reasons for that. First, the commission was assembled in a hurry. Johnson himself pressured the investigation to end before the November 1964 election. That's not surprising. The people longed for the truth about the assassination of their beloved president. Johnson would look like a superhero who gave that very truth and thus garner more votes. And secondly, the FBI only considered the theory that Oswald acted without accomplices. He fired 3 shots, 2 of which hit the target, and the interval between them was only 5 seconds. The investigation ignored some of the evidence, including the fact that the shots were heard not only from behind, from the side of the book depository, but also from the front, behind the fence on the grassy knoll. In all, 4, 5, and even 6 shots were called. There is also a police radio recording where experts heard another shot fired between the second and third shot. A grassy knoll was cited as the shooter's location. The presence of 2 killers already suggests a conspiracy, but it seemed insignificant to Warren and the deputies. Third, the magic bullet, which became the basis for alternative theories.
The first bullet, according to the commission, hit Kennedy in the back and exited through his neck.
Next, it wounded Governor Connolly, who was sitting in front of him, entered his right shoulder, exited through his chest, wounded his wrist, and lodged in his left hip. So 1 bullet did 7 injuries to 2 people. And still looking good. And it didn't come out of Connolly's thigh. It was found later on a gurney at the hospital. It fell out, so to speak. The explanation for the strange trajectory is simple. There was a height difference between the seats in the open-top car, so Kennedy was taller than Connolly. It must be said that the governor himself did not accept the single bullet theory, although he agreed with the conclusions that Oswald acted alone. Immediately after the commission, independent investigations began to spring up. Many of them concluded that there were multiple shooters and Lee Harvey Oswald was simply framed. But what is more interesting here is not even who exactly killed, but who could have organized and concealed this crime of such magnitude, and who in fact benefited from it. Actually, a lot of people. From the point of view of American hawks, that is supporters of war, John's foreign policy was a failure, and Kennedy himself was a weakling. Kennedy favored a peace that would not be imposed by US arms. He was against fomenting conflict in Vietnam, and by 1965, according to sources, he wanted to withdraw troops from there. Moreover, he was going to quit the Cold War as well. This all threatened not only to reduce the Pentagon's funding, but also mass resignations of the military. And by the way, the new President Johnson in less than a year ordered a full-fledged US intervention in Vietnam. In other words, Kennedy wanted to deprive the military and arms manufacturers of huge sums of money. During Kennedy's reign, the world twice stood on the brink of nuclear war during the Berlin and Caribbean crises. But Kennedy didn't show hawkish resolve and instead sought a peaceful solution. America's war image under Kennedy suffered severely, plus defeats in the space race and failure in the Bay of Pigs. Back then, the CIA trained Cuban exiles to take down Fidel Castro as quickly as possible. According to the agency, the operation in Cuba failed because Kennedy refused to use United States air power. Alan Dulles, former head of the CIA, whom Kennedy fired after the failure of the operation, accused him of this. And Dulles, as we know, was a member of the commission investigating Kennedy's assassination. Edward Hoover, the head of the United States political police, was clearly concerned about the president's rapprochement with the Soviet Union. He dedicated his life to fighting against communists. Moreover, Kennedy was setting a new direction for the FBI, fighting crime. And Attorney General Robert Kennedy, the president's brother, declared a real war on the mafia. But Hoover's plans did not include a shift in priorities. He didn't believe that actively fighting organized crime was necessary. Moreover, he himself had been suspected of criminal ties for years. Sources say that Kennedy promised to dissolve the FBI and break the CIA into thousands of pieces after winning the next election. As we know, before the 1959 revolution, the mafia controlled both the gambling business and the drug trade in Cuba. With the resignation of Alan Dulles, the attempts to overthrow the regime of Fidel Castro ended, leaving the mafia with nothing. Plus, the war on crime was having its effect. During Kennedy's presidency, there were 8 times more mobster convictions. According to sources, it was Jones who became the central link that united the American top of the CIA, FBI, and everyone else. He became vice president, not because Kennedy liked him, but because he was the governor of Texas and helped secure Kennedy's victory in the southern states. But in reality, Johnson didn't get along with the Kennedy brothers. He was reportedly worried about being left out of the president's new team. Plus, since Johnson was from Texas and controlled the local police, it may have helped him hide some evidence. Well, the most interesting version of Kennedy's assassination is that he was killed by the Fed masters, that is, the masters of money. On June 4, 1963, Kennedy signed Executive Order 11110. According to it, the United States Treasury Department had the right to issue dollars secured by silver from the Treasury. As a result, $2 and $5 money was printed with the inscription, Banknote of the United States, instead of Banknote of the Federal Reserve. Kennedy's decree aimed to remove the US Federal Reserve, the central bank, from printing money and return control to the government. He tried to correct the absurdity of the situation where the state cannot print its own money. For this, 4 presidents before him had been assassinated trying to posture for the Fed's monopoly. It is interesting that exactly 5 years after the decree, his brother Robert Kennedy, who was going to run for president, was shot dead. According to the official version, he too was killed by a lone fanatic. According to many researchers, the financial elite, bankers, and transnational corporations in the US gained absolute power after Kennedy's assassination. Kennedy, like Lincoln, dared to create a golden break against which the most powerful family clans, the financial ones, had fought for centuries. In short, Kennedy broke the unwritten laws of the masters of money. In 1994, assassin James Files confessed to Kennedy's murder. He named CIA agent David Atlee Phillips, head of the operation in Cuba, as the organizer. Files said he was the shooter on the grassy knoll. Allegedly, 2 members of the mafia were shooting with him. Oswald was a CIA agent and part of the shooter group, but he didn't pull the trigger. He was framed. Jack Ruby was also a member of the group and gave the killers a map of the route, and the authorities did not react to the confession. In 2007, even the autobiography of former CIA agent Howard Hunt was published, in which he also named David Atlee Phillips as the organizer and the customer, according to him, was Lyndon Jones. It is interesting that the CIA did have a profile of Oswald, which for some reason was destroyed in 1973. Today, there are more than 200 versions of the assassination of President Kennedy, and many of them tend to the fact that Kennedy was really killed by the American system. Our country was also suspected, but over time this version fell away. Under Kennedy, relations with the Soviet Union warmed up. Moscow itself was shocked by the news of his assassination. The CIA investigated the involvement of the USSR and its connection with Lee Harvey Oswald, but no charges were ever brought. About 3% of the investigation documents remain classified. Their publication is constantly postponed indefinitely. Now they promise to release them in the late 2030s. Maybe then we'll know the whole truth.